you mentioned the monetary reset, and I'm a big believer in the fourth turning theory as
Yeah.
well, right? We are definitely in it. There's this famous quote where um, there is
Right.
decades that nothing happens, and then there's years that decades happen. I think really since 2016, 2017, we're experiencing decades and decades of occurrences that I think is waking a lot of people up. It's uprooting society completely. What is this monetary reset, Lawrence? What does that mean? What does that entail?
Well, it's I can't tell you, Nico. I wish I could give you kind of a simple answer, but I can't because there are so many variables involved and so many people involved, and there's a lot of history and momentum in fiat. And fiat's not going to go away overnight. But what we're seeing are these increasingly large waves and swings of the fiat system not working and being out of control. I mean, and I mean, we saw a little bit of it in '98 with LTCM when they first started printing money to, the Russian crisis and to bail out Bear Stearns and all those companies. We saw, the housing bubble was a part of it, and that was when I really got radicalized for sound money. I mean, when they did the bailout in 2008, that was probably the biggest crime, the biggest economic crime that's occurred in the United States almost since the founding of the country. I mean, the notion that they would protect one class of people and disadvantage the rest of the country it was an incredible crime. Ben Bernanke should be in jail. But the, and I thought, by the way, I thought right then, and this is why I'm hesitant to say how quickly it's going to happen this time. And right then I thought, okay, that's it. This is over. This fiat system is going to blow apart. Well, guess what? They put it all back together and they created, they printed $3 or $4 trillion. Of course, it took 3 years. In the COVID crisis, they did the same amount or slightly more in 18 months. And that was kind of that was one swing, and then they got it all back under control, and they took it up to the next level, which was a sovereign debt level. They held interest rates at zero with ZERP, and that distorted everything even further. They created the everything bubble. I mean, they statistically they say there wasn't a lot of inflation from '08 to say call it 2017, 2018. I mean, they had it pinned at 2%. I mean, they were lying because shadow government numbers are much higher, but there was a lot of inflation in financial assets, right? Those reserves that they created, put on the balance sheets of banks, those all got cycled into the stock market. And, so we created really this Potemkin village of fake prices in financial assets based on too much money flowing around. And, all the deflationists said, well, it's going to be deflation forever. Don't worry about it. I mean, the Lacey Hunts of the world were just dead ass wrong. And obviously, COVID triggered it. I mean, it really got started before COVID, though, because when the repo blowout occurred and, well, the 2018, pivot, and then the repo blowout following that was the beginning of it. And then, of course, when COVID hit and Powell had his, whatever it takes moment where he, imitated Draghi and came over the top with just an enormous set of accommodations. And of course, Congress went crazy and we handed out all these PPP loans. I mean, some of those loans went to businesses that did not need them. I mean, I know people who have perfectly healthy businesses got huge loans. All they had to do was say they weren't going to fire anybody, and they got to collect millions of dollars. I mean, it was nuts. And then they claimed there wouldn't be inflation, which was an enormous policy mistake. They kept loose for far too long. More policy mistake. Now they see they've got inflation, and as I said, I think I've used this analogy in the past. I mean, they're driving a clown car on an icy road. One guardrail is massive inflation, and the other guardrail is massive deflation. And so by all the printing and the activities they took post COVID, they drove us towards the massive inflation guardrail. And sure enough, we got it, right? I mean, rents were up 18%, housing prices were up 20%. There were bidding wars for houses. I mean, the cost of everything was going up relentlessly. When they finally woke up to the fact that they screwed up, and they even admitted they screwed up, then they thought, oh shit. And they grabbed the steering wheel and drove hard in the other direction and said, we can solve this. Our credibility is real. We can tighten up and we'll control inflation. And, okay, fine. That's kind of what they've tried to do. But the fact of the matter is that, by doing so, they're gonna destroy the economy. I mean, you cannot. I mean, all these asset prices are gonna plunge, and So I mean, it's like the meme on Twitter where pick one, control inflation or create the Great Depression. I mean, the policies they're following right now will literally take all the financial markets to zero if they don't change policy, because nobody has any cash right now, and all these dollar debts are coming due, and there are no new dollars flowing into the system. M2 is flat to down. I mean, it's never slowed. It went up enormously, and now it's flat to slightly declining. And so as a result of that, they're in a box. And and we can talk about kind of the little micro moves that they've made, one way or the other, but they're screwed. And so I think the good news is that I think what's going to happen here is that yeah, thanks. You can see M2 is just slightly declining, but given how much it had grown, and the rate, notice the steady rate from 2010 to 2020. That if you don't have that, a fiat credit-based system does not work. It will I mean, you're creating more and more debt. You've got to pay interest on that debt. Unless you can get GDP growth to match the growth in the debt, which it hasn't for years, you don't have the income to service the debt, and so the debt goes bad, unless you print the money to give people the ability to service the debt. And so, they can try. I mean, they can continue to try. He can take rates up to 9 or 10%, but half the world's going to go bankrupt. Yeah, that's from my Twitter. I mean, that's it. That's the story, right? And I think that might be a little bit old. I think the debt line might have gotten a bit steeper, and so forth. So it's a mathematical fact. This isn't my opinion. It's just math, as Greg says. So, it's sad. It's really sad. But the good news is it's going to come to a head, and at least bringing it to a head will then, I think, lead to a better system. It has to lead to a better system. But how we get from here to there, I'm not smart enough to know. I don't think anybody really is. We don't know what they're going to do. We don't know how it's going to unfold. My suspicion is that they will pivot, and that they will try to print money, and we'll have a very highly inflationary environment. And I mean, there might be an Argentinian-like solution where we kind of get out of it by having high inflation for a bunch of years and getting GDP growth. And if they can do that, then theoretically, the debt burden would become more manageable at higher prices throughout the economy. But everyone would have suffered greatly through inflation. I mean, the bottom line is that there's just no free lunch in economics, right? And they've kind of tried to create basically they've tried to create a free lunch, and it's politics. I wonder if Lawrence has ever seen the Yeah, absolutely. I go to the website all the time. I know the guy who developed it. He's great. I've met him many times. It's a great website. Yeah, I mean, Jeff's right. You can't have infinite growth in a planet with limited resources. I mean, what we should be aiming for is not growth. I mean, this is the Keynesian era, right? Keynesians say you got to just continue to grow. Growth is good. Intrinsically, growth is good. Bullshit. Growth isn't good. On a limited resource planet, misallocated, resources and growth, we'll run out of stuff. What's good is efficiency, and what's good is productivity, and what's good is deflation. And that's where the Keynesians are wrong. And we've built our system on a Keynesian system. And as a result of it, we're in this, we're in this box canyon, and we can't turn around and get out of it. And I don't think the worst part of it is the way the political system is constructed. Most people don't even realize what's going on, and the policymakers aren't smart enough to even begin to contemplate this issue. And to the degree that they do, they realize that changing things would ruin their privilege, and so they're not going to change things. So, I mean, I think Bitcoin is God-given, and I think that there is a higher power, and I think the higher power is basically going to school us all into why, our grandkids are going to sit around and say, you guys were idiots. I mean, how did you ever let the government get control of the money supply and set the interest rates? What the fuck were you thinking? It's pretty obvious that the whole system was going to blow up eventually.